Hi, I'm Kate Abney, Homes Editor of Luxe Interiors and Design Southeast Edition, and I'm thrilled to have you join us today for the keynote talk, Experience Home with Bill Stewart at Discover ADAC. I just want to thank the wonderful team at ADAC who have worked so tirelessly on this year's event and our fabulous sponsor, Designer Carpets, for making today's talk possible. Before Bill and I get started, we have a quick video to show you about Designer Carpets so you can learn more about what they do. Thank you again. Love seeing that video from Designer Carpets, and so excited to formally introduce you to the amazing Bill Stewart, who is something of a design icon in Atlanta, California, and beyond, designing luxury residents for high-profile clients. And since he's someone who doesn't do talks like this very often, I feel very lucky to be here with him today. So here's a little background on Bill. Hi, Bill. Welcome.
Well, hi, Kate. How you doing?
Doing great. So Bill studied architecture in Florida for 4 years before pivoting to landscape architecture. And he worked at a plant nursery in Florida for a couple years until he realized that didn't feel quite right. So he switched to interior design, graduated with a degree from the University of Florida, and kicked off his career in the late 70s at hospitality firm Design Continuum in Atlanta. He ultimately became the firm's head of design a few years later. Then he started his own firm in the 1980s. Today, he's the co-principal of Stewart Moore Designs alongside business partner Bill Moore. He comes to the table with this amazing diversity of experience that's allowed him to shape the homes that he's been lucky enough to call his own. Today, Bill and I will talk about the experiences he creates through his designs. The thing that stands out most to me about Bill's work is that it isn't driven by trends, style prescriptions, or even his own signature. Instead, he's all about creating experiences in the home and even different experiences or moods within the same residence. And you can always count on him to respond to the location, context, and history of a building. And it's fascinating to see how he does this. So today we're going to take a look back through time at some of the best examples from Bill's portfolio, his homes from the past 15 years. He'll describe the methods he used to embrace each phase of his life and how he uses those same methods for client homes that reflect who they are and who they want to be. And while I know many of us have hunkered down during COVID, I think it's safe to say that Bill has not skipped a beat. He's been flying back and forth to Palm Springs to work on several projects, plus his newest house in Atlanta, which we'll talk about toward the end of today's talk. And as we're talking today, I want to encourage you to use the built-in Q&A feature on Zoom, and we'll look forward to answering your questions at the end. So Bill, again, welcome. Thank you so much for being with me today.
Well, thank you, Kate.
Yeah, well, I would love to kick off, before we take the audience through your design portfolio over the years, I would love to have you could you tell us, just sort of in brief, what is your design philosophy? How would you define that?
Well, my design philosophy probably really kind of centers around individuals and what they really think about the way they would like to live. So many of our clients kind of give us a background on their families, the history of their furnishings, the places they've lived. And so you kind of get this kind of prescription from them, so to speak, of how to shape something of their environment. I try to kind of bring something new to the picture when we're designing for them. It's all about the way they're going to live, their experience, which would be different perhaps than mine, than yours. Mm-hmm. And it would be really having to do a lot with their age, a lot with the location, And I think a lot goes into actually designing a home for someone. I think we don't really use a cookie cutter, the same method. We like each project to kind of stand on its own and absolutely reflect some of the wishes and desires of the clients. So I kind of use what they tell me and then run with it.
Right. And since you're designing an experience, you know, versus a room, you're designing for individuals, for an actual life. I love the way that you've sort of baked all of that personality into each of your spaces. And what's so interesting is we see your personality in full view in your own homes, which we're going to look at today too. So I would love to sort of just open that up for everyone. Let's start here. So one thing I want to kind of start with before we get into your portfolio is that you have lived in 5 homes in 3 years. Is that right?
Yes, and maybe actually more if you include a rental now here and there of moving in between. But yes, and a lot of the homes that you're going to see are in fact what you are going to see are the California homes, and that has sort of been my experimental playground, so to speak. And one of the great things about California is the openness and I find that there isn't really any set ideas of what design should be. I think sometimes in the South, we get kind of stuck on a Southern design, which is regional, which is a great thing. And I think California is not all that regional because as a state, it kind of goes half the length of the United States. It goes from, Washington all the way down to Mexico. And so you really do get the appearance that there is a lot of different sort of design in California. So when you speak of California design, it could be Northern California design, Southern California design, Baja, the desert, certainly the mountains, so the beaches. So there's a very diverse group of ideas that can kind of come about when you're designing a home in California.
Right. And you have this knack for diversity. I think there's obviously diversity in your experience and also diversity in the disciplines you use in your design, because you are running the gamut from, formal to casual, traditional to modern, and you're mixing all of these elements. So it sounds like California in particular, where a lot of the homes we'll see, is a really great backdrop for that experience and kind of using your homes as your own laboratory. And another thing you said to me is that you like to change homes because you're always evolving and you're always changing, and the home should change with you. And I would love to just sort of show everyone, you bought your first home in California, I believe it was about 15, 16 years ago.
That's correct.
And this is the Vista House. This was your first home in California, right?
Yes, and it was a complete remodel. It didn't look like anything. We resurrected it from the past.
Yes, and now this house you said they're track houses, this particular neighborhood. They belong to folks who are in the film industry.
Well, they were done for I want to call them like B quality film stars that maybe were just kind of coming up. They were less expensive homes, and yes, they were tract homes. It's the first California neighborhood to actually have the wires buried underground. So that kind of gave it a very clean backdrop. And basically, these houses are the same cake, but different icing, and they're twisted on the property. And this particular one was designed by Charles Dubois, and it was finished in 1964. And when we purchased the house, it was a lot of the fenestration had completely changed about it. So this is a renovation that was meant to resurrect the way it was when it was built.
Okay. And let's see what we got here. Well, so you with homes that you buy, you really honor the sort of the history of the building, the context, and I see that you have this balance between taking things back to their original glory and sort of bringing them forward into a modern era. So what did you do? How did you do that with this particular home?
Well, you're correct in saying that. In fact, all the homes that you're going to be seeing are all designed by architects. And I really respect other designers, especially of the past. And as you can see in this house, I have a love for vintage cars. So this house was kind of the perfect complement to some of those automobiles. And it's sort of like a handbag and kind of complete an outfit. And the outfit being the house itself and the cars being the handbags. So basically, a lot of what was done to bring it up to the at the time, I guess it was the 20th century, or maybe we were the very early 20th century. The landscape was redone. A lot of these houses, you have to basically cut back on what's been overgrown, and you have to kind of basically remove all the old icing, so to speak, and put on new icing. So that's kind of what you see here. The cake is still there, the icing's new, but the format is exactly the way it was built.
That's wonderful. And going into the living room, which I gave everyone a little preview of a moment ago, I love how we've sort of established, sort of set stage of the color palettes you love and the way that you like to design interiors in your residences. You have this amazing sort of teal color and the chartreuse and the, Italian mosaic tile in the fireplace, which is very, period appropriate for the 1960s. So can you tell me about sort of the mood you were trying to establish in this room and what you use it for, or did use it for when this was your home?
Well, this is the living room of the home. And one of the things that I would say is that this is the first home I ever had in California. Mm-hmm. So this was an Easterner's view of what they thought California lifestyle should look like. So it's probably amped up a little bit. I think a lot of the colors came from a palette that you would kind of typically associate with the 50s. I love furniture design. So the pieces that you see in here mostly are vintage and they're kind of collected. And a lot of them were purchased in New York, Atlanta, and then believe it or not, only a few pieces from California, but that would eventually change as I had more homes out there. So this particular interior is kind of it's a place that you would very much, would relax. There's the fireplace on the left, which obviously is not in operation now. Very thick shag carpeting on a terrazzo floor. I love the juxtaposition between something warm and fuzzy and then something kind of cool and collected. And I also, the centerpiece in the room really isn't the fireplace in my mind. It is that bubble lamp that you see on the coffee table. Mm-hmm. And that is Moon 69 by an Italian Franco-American designer named Gino Sarfatti. And those are little tiny bulbs that are on a dimmer, and it gives the feeling of like at nighttime, kind of a glowing candelabra on the table. And obviously was reflection of the moon when it was designed, which was 1969 when we, of course, went there. So a lot of the other pieces that you see are a combination of American and Italian design, and they range from the period of the 50s through the 70s. And my envision for the house in general was that what would it feel like if someone had built this house and then traveled around the globe and sort of collected period design of that time and assembled it? So while there's a little bit of California design here, there's a lot of European design, and there is a lot of design that is current, such as the artwork.
Yes, and you mentioned that you have new pieces and you're culling some of those from Atlanta, I'm guessing ADAC, and you also love a lot of vintage. There's a Sèvres porcelain bust of Lafayette from the 40s. You have this amazing contemporary painting by a Las Vegas artist, Yek, and just a lot of pieces that we'll see recurring in your homes as we sort of go through the years, through your portfolio. And I also, I particularly love the way you brought in these vintage items. And there's this quote by you. You said, "I love living with things from the past because it helps me with the future." I think that you drag things from your past into your future, and that's a connection to where we've come as human beings and as people. So I really loved that sentiment, because when you're creating rooms, you're using these wonderful vintage pieces that get you in touch with who you really are as a person and sort of travel with you as you change. So love that. And we're seeing a lot of the same sort of palette and influences in this guest bedroom. And I'm just so struck by this photograph. Tell me again about this photo.
Well, this was actually an ad campaign for Versace in the year 2000. And it's kind of based upon the Stepford Wives. And this was shot in Los Angeles, and it was actually shot in Hancock Park. And the two models there are very well known, and he would dress them to look kind of like sisters, like clones, whatever you want to call it. There's a lot of doubles in it. So I just think it kind of is a little bit of a tongue-in-cheek of the superficial lifestyle that you see in advertising, but they obviously were kind of poking fun at California maybe a little bit, and using it as kind of a stylistic backdrop. So this picture has kind of traveled with me, and it was purchased in London, and it's always slight controversy, and people tend to kind of warm up to it, even though it's kind of a cold facade.
It's really haunting and beautiful. And I also really love the lamps on the bedside table. They're by Willie Rizzo or Rizzo.
Yeah.
You mentioned he's a photographer who shot Marilyn Monroe. So it's another really wonderful piece of California history to sort of, kick things off in Palm Springs. I love that. And also when we go into the outdoor space, we see just sort of this idea of Palm Springs being about indoor-outdoor living and creating another room, creating another mood where you can gather with the ones you love and have a great time. And you said that a lot of these pieces are sort of French or Italian, sort of highbrow, not necessarily pieces from California, but they work. Could you tell us why that is?
Well, the frog that you see was created by the Lalondes in the late 60s, and they were French, and it's a lily pad and a frog chair. And it's more of a piece of sculpture you can actually experience sitting in. Is it the most comfortable thing in the world? No. Was it fun to sit in? Absolutely. And the chair that you see on the right is a contemporary chair at the time. It's Mark Newson. He's an Australian designer, and that was done for Capellini. And it's a woven wicker chair. And it just shows you how wicker, who you think of as a really old material, as you can see in the two chairs that flank the sofa there, is actually this basket weave is a very contemporary way of doing it. So I love the juxtaposition between something newly created and then something that's vintage and even of the same material. So these rooms that we create in California, the outside, are really the most important. And I think now more than ever they are. People just love the fresh air. They love the idea that we're not really using air conditioning or heating. And I would say it's a seasonal room in a lot of places, but out there, it's actually probably a 3/4 a year room that you would use.
And there's this whole amazing lifestyle in Palm Springs where, you're hanging out by the pool late at night, sipping martinis, creating a sort of sense of adventure where you are, which I think is so important, especially in our current climate, with so many of us staying close to home. And I also loved, you said this, after traveling the world, you're more fascinated by places in the US after having sort of traveled the globe, but also because you can be near friends. They're not, strangers, wonderful strangers that you meet abroad, but people that you really can see on a regular basis and entertain with. Is that right?
Well, that's correct. And I think that is what I love about second homes more than anything. And I love when second homes really get used to the point that they can almost teeter-totter which is the second home and which is the main home. Because I think you do develop a sense of community with not only the people that live there, but you get involved in the activities. So suddenly, whether it be California, North Carolina, Florida, I think the more often you go there, you feel very comfortable at home. And I think that as we age, we look at weather, we look at heat differently. I know I do. Who thought that? I mean, when I first moved to Atlanta, I loved all these wonderful jackets that you could wear. I loved the snow. I loved getting out in the wintertime. Now I find myself liking warmer climates. I think that has to do with age a little bit. I watched it with my parents and I didn't believe it could happen, but it does. And I think that establishing a second home gives you a little bit of a home base. So as much as I've traveled the world and loved doing that, I just something warm and fuzzy about going to your own home where you even know the next door neighbors. They're almost as good friends as the ones that you have in Atlanta.
Right, right. And I think it's so interesting because right now, a lot of people have sort of flip-flopped. During COVID, we can all work remotely, or most of us. And, a lot of folks are going to their second homes and sort of staying there more months of the year than normal. So it's definitely very pertinent at this time, I think.
Well, and a note that you said, that's so true. And what we really saw that happen from March all the way through the present time is that out in Palm Springs, we saw people that it was their second home, it became their first home.
Right.
And in the real estate market just boomed because people were trying to escape the tight confines of the city. And I think when you have this, I guess you call it pandemic that we've been going through, everyone else seems to call it that, you really, space is suddenly the greatest luxury you can have. And space could be your backyard, space could be, you know, out floating on a sailboat in the middle of the ocean, you know, it could be on the beach with no one around, it can be in your backyard that you create. I think we're not, even with children and with other family members, we're not all bound by four walls. And I think that's what's so great about the outdoor lifestyle.
I love that. And also with your mountain house, which is such a fantastic, you know, example of switching gears, which is something you've been known to do throughout your career. I really think there's no better example. And this is in Idlewild, 45 minutes above Palm Springs, right?
That is correct, yes.
Yes.
A very treacherous drive going up 6,000 feet, but nonetheless, once you get there, it's a completely different world.
Right, right. And this was, I understand, built in the 70s by a lumberjack?
Well, that's a little bit overly romanticized. It's actually built by a guy that owned a mill, a lumber mill. So he wasn't, to call him a lumberjack would be a little bit like, I guess he was a glorified lumberjack, but he owned a lumber mill. So all the lumber you see in the house, which is extensive, was milled by him. And so his company. And so what makes this house kind of unique is all the pieces of lumber are really long. So there's not a lot of joinery.
Which is also very modern in a sense because of the clean lines. This sort of an organic modernism.
And if you just take a look at that vertical fence there, those are 4x4 pieces of lumber, 8 feet tall, that are anchored at the bottom with no support in between them whatsoever. And they're almost beautifully, like a piano keys. They're almost perfectly laid out. Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's really incredible. And we're about to go inside and sort of see how that renders on the interior. But architecturally, this is an example of 2 volumes. So there's the main home and then there's the artist studio that are connected by between the 2 pavilions, and there's the stone walkway coming from the road, but just sort of set the tone. You're sort of retreating to a cooler temperature, a higher elevation, surrounded by the trees. And I feel like you've really responded to that with your design. But you've also really designed an experience by using a theme for this home, which I think is the most evident in sort of, we're looking through to the dining area right now from the living room, and you sort of see the kitchen. But can you tell me about the theme of the home that you started with?
Yes, because this was sort of a mountaintop retreat. It reminded me of Alfred Hitchcock's North by Northwest, which is one of my favorite films. And in that movie, there's a scene where there's a home not too unlike this, kind of Frank Lloyd Wright in feeling, at the kind of the base of Mount Rushmore, the sculpture, and in the Dakotas, and the lighting and the textures. Just reminded me so much in the topography, as well as it's the trees and everything around it, reminded me very much of that film. So I kind of went off on a little bit of a Hitchcock theme, and I would say that has to do with there's relevance, like there's basically a vulture, a steel vulture on top of the kitchen cabinetry, kind of overlooking this tall space. And there's also, as you'll see maybe in another shot, there's a picture of Mount Rushmore under construction. So I had that.
Right to the right of the photo, you guys, I'm sorry if the windows are overlapping it, but it's a wonderful photo, yes.
And so there's a little bit of feeling of also the craftsmanship that goes into a lot of mountain communities and rural communities, the ironwork, the woodwork. So the furnishings you see here are very organic. So I'd call this organic modern, where everything has to do with hardly any rectilinear shapes, but everything kind of molded and rounded and tortured, and the rocks and the wood. There's no really painted surfaces here.
Right, and you have that original cedar that the original builder had clad the home with on the interior, and then you've responded to that with these really cool Paul Evans dining chairs that have that organic feel, and then of course, yeah, the very cinematic feel with the photography. And let's look at the living room opposite, which you sort of responded. It is an open format space, but you sort of responded to the theme. And I love the way that you have mixed the clean lines, the sort of modern feeling, with this very textured, organic one, especially with the sculptures. And is that something that you feel like, are you a fan of the juxtaposition?
Well, I'm a big fan of art in general in the home. I think that's something that really speaks to the soul and to the individual. And I think we talked on this earlier about what makes an experience. Well, you know, what I see and love in art, my clients or you or anyone else might see something different. And I think art is a very personal thing. That's not something we normally select for clients. I love to kind of lead them to the water and let them do the drinking. And then I think it's a very personal thing. It's different than the comfort of a chair. So you'll start to see a lot of pieces in my work, especially in my own homes, that reflect the arts. The other thing that's kind of interesting about this particular shot is the flooring in this house is all butcher block, and it's butcher block in-grain pine. So it's no different than a giant countertop for all matters. So when we actually refinished the floors, we just sanded it down, but it was, you could sand it for days because you'd never get to the end of it. It's completely different than planked flooring. And I think what was interesting is the combination of the planking on the walls, the vertical walls, and then having this butcher block on the floor just gives the pattern and interest, and you see the end grains. And then again, it's all part of that organic modern kind of feel.
That's incredible. And also this here is the artist studio, which I know that you mentioned you and your husband sort of stay here more often than you do in the main bedroom, which is so interesting because it's a retreat within a retreat. And I love the setting because you feel like you're in the middle of the trees.
Well, you're actually at the very top of the trees. And so because this house is on a severe slope. So those trees are actually way below you, the actual trunks of them. But this was a very glassed in room with all the privacy in the world. The biggest thing you had to worry about is the sun rising. And as you see it in this picture. And I love the idea of, like, you'll see, you know, typically a lot of people in a mountain house might not think of Joe Glove, which is, you know, something from the 60s, an Italian, basically call it a sofa if you would, or a giant, you know, club chair. It's kind of just, it's a pop art piece, but because the leather has patinaed over time, I think I like bringing in things from periods that you wouldn't expect in a place like this. But this was a converted artist studio into what we became our master bedroom.
Great. And I love the way that you've included period pieces like the 70s chair in the home to sort of keep everything cohesive.
And then again, that was a single kind of a carved piece by an artist. And I like bringing in craft, I think, in this particular house.
Right. I love it. And now we also have your LA house, which is another really special home. And you bought this home from someone pretty neat, didn't you?
Yes, I did. It was from Jaden Wheatland of the Go-Go's, and she owned this home. And I actually rented it from her with the idea that if I loved it, I could purchase it to her for a fixed amount. And of course, it was love at first sight, and then it was a honeymoon after it was there. So quickly afterwards, I purchased it. And this was basically, I sort of called it my hotel away from Palm Springs. And also, so when you flew into LA, you could spend the night here or spend the weekend and then drive out to the desert for the weekend. So this house was very different. I'm a big fan of Art Deco architecture, and this is actually streamlined modern, which came slightly on the later side of Art Deco, the late 30s. And this is sort of similar to something you see in South Beach. Mm-hmm. And LA has a number of deco homes there, but not to the extent that we have in Florida. But this is a very, was a very simple home, and it was designed by a gentleman, William Kesling, and it was meant to be part of a whole group of these houses in this particular neighborhood. Just like a lot of these architects in their imagination, only a few were built. Didn't really get off the ground, but this is quite an interesting house, and I really loved. It's the completely opposite that what you've seen in these other houses, and I like the idea of not doing the same thing, not dressing the same way, not having the same friends, and not necessarily having the same style in homes.
Right, right. And another thing I love about this home, and we'll see more of it when we get through the slides, but you also worked on the landscape architecture. So you're sort of pulling from your past experience and using that to shape these new dwellings. And it looks fantastic.
And sometimes I kind of feel like I'm a Renaissance man, you know, where back in the day they did a little bit of everything. I love landscaping. I love lighting. I love architecture. I love interior design. And I think the whole idea of this experience, it comes from the curb. It goes all the way through the house to the barbecue in the backyard. It really is something, is a thread that goes through. You see it at show houses a lot, you know, where you got a lot of group of designers, and there's been an architect, there's landscape architects, and they're all kind of getting it all together for it. I think personally, I love doing it myself. And this is really, I look at these houses that I've owned in the past, I've looked at them as really a jumping off part to the next part of my career. I also look at a big thing about experimentation and about doing something that I don't really have to answer to too many people. And if I have to redo it, I redo it. And by the way, that does happen. And but it's all about, I think, the presentation from the curb through the house.
Yes. Well, let's look inside. Because this living room is such an amazing sort of iconic space. It's very, as you said, it's sort of film noir, 1930s, this sort of Chinatown influenced aspect of LA, sort of in the theme. And you actually mentioned that a film was, or Black Dahlia was partly filmed at this residence, which is another really neat sort of fact about this house. But you went with a Paul Frankel coffee table. There's this original built-in sofa wall, which I'm assuming you reupholstered because it looks so beautiful. And we have the Kim Weber modern chairs. And you said, now Emmanuel Weber, can you tell us who he was?
Okay, this house is completely different than the Palm Springs house. Remember when I was telling you that was an Easterner's view of a Palm Springs residence?
Right.
This is actually so California. Everything in this room is from California. And from the rug, well, actually, it's probably actually woven in the East, but it was certainly designed in California, the bamboo Chinese Art Deco rug, the Kim Weber chairs. He was a furniture designer and an architect that designed for Lloyd's tubular chrome furniture company. And then Paul Frankel was also California. And then the built-in sofa back there was actually heavily patterned when I got to it. So I sort of wanted to calm it down. And I love the shape and form of streamlined modern. I see it as a very simple, very restful, very easy on the eye, very sculptural. I think of all the kind of designs or homes that I've owned, I think this house is probably the most sculptural. Well, you'll see it in the future, but this house is very sculptural and very clean lined. And I think my love of art and from craft is evident in the houses that I end up choosing to live in.
Absolutely. And also there's this amazing room that was enclosed in the 1950s. It used to be outdoors, and we see your palette reappear and some really cool pieces, you know, from ADAC. You mentioned a few of your favorites are in this room. And what do you use this room for in terms of a mood?
Well, this was really what you see in the background, that this kind of, I want to call it English pea green. That was the outdoor fireplace, and it would have been white as the exterior of the house was. And when this room was enclosed, this was actually lower than the rest of the house. It's kind of carved into, and there's an outdoor patio to the left, which you'll see. This room was basically given the idea of that I wanted a little bit more casual room that was a little bit more collected, a little bit more stuff in it. The chandelier was very special. It kind of is basically a French chandelier that's chinoiserie, and it's a wooden chandelier with parchment shades that are original, and it speaks to me of all. It's an earlier piece, the 1930s, but I love the marriage. It kind of has that Chinatown feel to it. So LA is very influenced by the different cultures that live there. And I love the fact that I love Chinese Art Deco, for lack of a better word, which is kind of like having a taco that's Chinese also. You know, it's a combination of periods, and it's a mesh. And so that this room sort of reflects that, but it doesn't have a rug in it. It just opens out to a patio. So as you see, there's no ceiling fan. There's just an old industrial fan that is also from the 30s that just provides the kind of the blowing wind of the times that you would want to have.
Right. But you also have this amazing true outdoor space, which you redid, and you brought in native California plants, and you brought this back to its full glory, this sort of stucco walled garden.
Yeah, it's exactly what this is a walled-in garden. It almost feels very European, because the Europeans, I think, in tight spaces, such in Paris, this would be something that could be very typical in Paris, and also something that you could also see in Morocco. So then again, this is influences into culture. And, you know, when you speak of California, you have to think about Europe, you know, and you have to think about, you know, the deserts out in Morocco. A lot of the foliage is somewhat similar, or it imports well. So people have actually brought things over by cuttings and roots and from different nurseries. And so some of these are very exotic plants that aren't really native to California, but because of the temperature, do grow really well. And what you see, and obviously in the fountain, is papyrus. And, you know, that's obviously kind of very Egyptian. So you do have this kind of cross-cultural feeling. But the greatest thing of all is you have this arid backyard, free of bugs, and very enjoyable at night.
I can only imagine how nice that is at night. And speaking of nighttime, there's another home that you've owned that has a particular, you know, new personality at night. So tell us about the Black House.
Well, this is probably the most bizarre house, and I say bizarre in a loving sort of way, that one could own, because it literally is like a giant black stealth bomber crashed into the middle of the desert. And it's very angular, very severe, and it's very black. And here, the desert, which is the opposite of that, it's the rounded forms, the weathered rocks, the sand, you know, the hard. So it's harsh. The desert's harsh, and so is the architecture. And the way they actually collide together makes you really, basically, like I said about sculpture, it's like a huge sculptural object that you can actually live in rather than live with. And so this house was actually being constructed at the time I had purchased some property, which I was going to build my own home out there. And I obviously paid attention to this. This was way more involved than I was thinking of doing. And then a couple years later, it came on the market, and I thought to myself, like instant gratification. And so I bought it and then put my own spin on it.
And it's 150 miles outside of LA, right?
Yes, and it's about a 35-minute drive out of Palm Springs, and yes, it's about 100. You're maybe not quite so far, but yes, a couple-hour drive out of LA.
And it's all about the landscape. And I know we're going to see more about the influences as we sort of get inside the home. But you've compared this to feeling like being on the moon when you're out at the pool.
Well, I think because of the harshness. And
Yeah.
none of us have obviously gone to the moon, and we've only seen imagery. But you get the idea of, craters, you get the idea of jagged rocks, dust, hardly anything growing. You get this kind of otherworldly feeling here also, like there's no one around. I mean, it's you against these rocks and this actually very cold pool. Do not think the desert is necessarily a place that gets so blazingly hot. This is the high desert. So the high desert this is actually at 4,000 feet. So it could actually snow there, and has actually. So unlike Palm Springs, which would be lower in elevation substantially, and that would get very warm, this actually tends to be a little bit cooler, and especially at night. But in the heat of a hot summer night, there's no place better than the desert, because there is not a bug that exists in the sky. And that's so really great for us that hate mosquitoes, basically. I guess hate's a horrible word, but mosquitoes, there's probably not a loved insect. So that's one of the great things about, then again, the outdoors in California. You've seen LA, you've seen a little bit of Palm Springs now, and you've seen the mountains, and here it is, the desert. So the thing that's interesting thing about it, you'll see that tree there that is completely dead. That tree has been dead for years and years and years and hasn't fallen apart. And what's funny about it is the lack of moisture in the desert really preserves wood. And I think that's the petrified forest in places like that. That's why you have that. But in Atlanta or someplace like that, over a rainy season, it would already decayed and been gone.
Right. That's so interesting. And also inside is so interesting. This is the living room. And, you told me that this house sort of disappears at night because of the black exterior, the facade. And then you have these coffee tables that are reflective, and they sort of amplify that. And another thing you said to me is that with this house, you're sort of a slave to the surroundings because it's glass, and you're confronted by this desert at all times. So you decided to sort of design the interiors in this minimalist way. But you really went all out with certain pieces, like this banana silk rug is really special, right?
Yes, and that's actually from Designer Carpets. Robert helped me to do that, and that's a 16-foot round. And so that's there's not a parallel wall in this place whatsoever. It's considered just a bunch of angles. So a big, thick, round rug that goes back to my point that these are black concrete floors. In fact, the entire interior is black. It might look a little brown from these pictures, but it's black. The entire interior is black. The entire exterior is black. So what you're really seeing is just these cinematic kind of like screens that that you're looking through to see the desert out there. And you'll see the brush, the junipers and things that grow out there. They don't grow in the pinyon pines. They're so slow growing. They don't get really tall. They're not going to really ever give too much shade. And so the other idea about this, I love the idea of kind of old distressed leather. I love the reflective quality of the lamps and the coffee tables to reflect the exterior. And then as you can see, these pieces of furniture that actually from up in Northern California around Santa Cruz area, done in sheepskin. So they just have this sort of driftwood, kind of old wood, and with that wall of glass that you see, they almost blur the idea of whether this is inside or outside. It's almost like a cave.
Right. There's so many themes that you can kind of come up with this home, and it is so cinematic. And I also love that you have the wood sort of, I guess we'll call them a chair and a half, because you have these sort of Santa Cruz root tables and seating is sort of a recurring theme throughout your house. So I love seeing throughout your homes. So I love seeing them here. And also, I think we have to show everyone this shot with the dining room, because I think it really illustrates how you're confronted with the outdoors at all times, and you're living, sort of with the moon and the stars. Right now, you're living with the sunset, and you're watching the wildlife go to sleep. But then you are able to really experience the night. And didn't you say that when folks drive by, they can't even see the house at night?
Well, you got to understand, people think it's so funny. You live in a black house in the desert. Is that the worst thing ever? Doesn't it get hot? Two things. They're 8-inch walls. It was meant to be black from the beginning. So typical walls are, 5 inches, 6 inches. These are like much thicker. Also, it has a white roof on it, stretched on top, and it's a flat roof. And the third thing is the idea of it being black was to disappear at night. So when you go out, it's not about the house anymore. It's about the setting. It's about, you can stand out there on that triangular thrusting patio, and just look up around you, and the house just disappears, and you see the stars and everything. So there's not a lot of lighting here, and even the lighting fixture that you see over the table, I wanted it to be clearish, so you look through it. I didn't want some really solid,
Right.
and the idea that it almost mimics a flower or the sun, kind of. I guess in this particular case, I captured it, the sun coming through it, and it kind of was exactly what I was trying to get when I bought it.
I love that. And I love that you do the same thing for your clients when you create their homes. And I think that everyone watching can imagine the way that you interpret, every client's unique, sort of life experiences and personalities to adapt to their residences as well.
And I'm showing my own work because I'm so familiar with it, but at the same time to show that as a designer, you really have to think outside the box. And I love a new road that I haven't gone down. I like to tackle a new game. I enjoy a challenge. And so these kind of have represented the last 15 years of ownership at different times.
Okay. And now this home is also in Palm Springs, and we're calling it the Pink House, which seems very appropriate. And you told me that you were inspired by the Beverly Hills Hotel with sort of your approach to this home after you purchased it. Is that right?
That is totally correct.
And what was it about the Beverly Hills Hotel that you captured?
Well, when I first saw this house, when it first came on the market, it was a very kind of a dirty Dijon mustard color. And it just kind of, in the foliage was all overgrown, and it was, the yard was in a disarray. You had to look past that to see the sculptural quality of this house also. And this house has an interesting history to it that I found out once we got into it. But my first thing is, when I first saw it, I said, this house has to be pink. I just know that. I said, it will make a statement. I said, it will do everything to take what was kind of a little bit of a sad sack into kind of a makeover. It's a total, like, Hollywood makeover. And the Beverly Hills Hotel has always been one of my favorite hotels because I just love the spirit of it. And so the Beverly Hills Hotel is also a pink hotel, but where the really connection came from is, I said, I want to know how they handled the interiors of Pink House, because there's a lot of, different probably ways you could go about it. So I stayed there, and I looked at kind of different ways that other designers had kind of done the interiors, because a lot of different designers have worked on that hotel. And I then saw there was the green, obviously, and kind of a pale green, and would be a nice opposite, kind of opposite on the color wheel from the pink. And you'll see that on the interior of the home. And I think obviously pink and green is kind of a classic combination, from Lily Pulitzer to the Beverly Hills Hotel to a lot of things. So that was kind of the inspiration.
Well, before we go into the interior, which I just gave a quick preview of, I want to just mention a few notes about this house. So it was designed by Albert Frey, Swiss architect, who worked with Corbusier.
He worked with Le Corbusier.
Yes, and his favorite color was pink.
Yes,
so,
he loved, especially clothing, pink trousers. He's known for them.
Yes, and also we got these amazing grates on the front of the house that were designed by Jonathan Dvorkin Hill. I hope I'm saying that correctly.
Yes, Johnny Hill, yes.
Frank Lloyd Wright's studio, and I love that it's just another example of this appropriateness that you're doing when you are rehabbing these amazing homes.
And I think what's interesting about a lot of these houses is that with architects, a lot of times architects will design a product, and the product will get manufactured, and maybe they utilize that product on one of their homes and everything. And that was the case in this house. That those screens were actually made for another house, the Newtone house, and the Newtone doorbell people. And so that went into production with the Tennessee Manufacturing outside Memphis, Tennessee. And they So it was actually off-the-shelf product that you could have, and anyone could use those screens during the late 50s, early 60s.
Very cool. And the living room, the indoor living room, is such a great example of how your favorite pieces have traveled with you, because I recognize a lot of these pieces from the Vista House, which was
Right.
we looked at, and I know some of them have also, they're very evident in the Cody House, which we'll get to. But yeah, and then the exterior sort of living area is even more phenomenal, I think, because it's just so big. And you had mentioned that the previous owners had built it that way so that they had a lot of covered outdoor space.
Yes, this has 700 square feet of outdoor area. So seems like every house that I keep getting, the outdoor area keeps growing. The houses aren't changed in size. They're all the same size houses. They're not particularly big houses. They range from about 2,000, 2,100 to about 2,700 square feet, maybe 2,800 square feet in this case. But it's the property and the exteriors that seem to grow. What's not air conditioned, and I think my love for the outdoors is even increasing as we speak.
Right, right. And this is an example of an outdoor area that you really rehabbed with your landscaping skills.
Yes, I did all the landscaping. We took everything down to the ficus hedges. The only thing that's original to the property is the exterior hedges.
Right, right. Okay. And then I also want to show everyone the Cody House, which you still own. And this is your current California house. And it's really interesting because you have brought it back to its original glory with sort of the cedar shake roof and all the terrazzo flooring, which maybe would not be up to code currently, but you've got it registered as a historic property, right?
Yes, it is considered a historic property, so they will allow you to do in California, they give you a little bit of a leeway. Like if it originally had this type of roof on it, it's fine. You know, obviously cedar shake is a controversial thing in an area prone to fire. These are fireproof shingles, but still they are wood. And so they're a little bit of a newfangle in terms of being able to be used. So in getting a permit, you have to describe what roof is going on there. And so in this case, the original documentation showed that it had that roof, and California loves historic preservation. That's one of the things I really love about the state. They reward people that actually restore these houses with lower taxes, and they do a whole, and also they put protection on the houses. So someone can't come and tear down this house. They can't come down and tear down the pink house. Those are now considered historic houses in the state of California.
Oh my gosh, I love it. It's amazing. And it's another great example of how you've taken your sort of your skills with hardscaping and landscaping, and you really transformed a property that was kind of a little bit forlorn when you found it, and now it just sings. And it's a really amazing home. And there is a lot of glass, which we'll see with the interiors, but it feels very private because it's your property. So.
Well, I think this house, I just want to say something about it, is this one I have taken the hardscape, what you see, the poured concrete, the terrazzo, this is actually not the front entrance to the house. This is actually the side yard. But the idea is that this is the first time I've ever had a piece of property of this scale. I mean, it's about almost an acre, but I think in this case, I wanted to use each area for an area. So there are different areas that you can be in shade, you could be in the sun, you can be with a group of 6 people. So in different parts all around this house, you could, the exterior, it's kind of blown up the idea that I've kind of liked with the other houses where you had a lot of exterior area to get out from the inside. This one is even more so.
And it's a really wonderful example of having the different zones and the different moods so that you can sort of move around and entertain that way and everything feels new. So I love that. And also indoors, we see, you know, a reappearance of a lot of your favorite pieces that have traveled with you and some new ones and more of your rugs. I noticed that you really love carpets and rugs and sort of incorporating them in a prominent way in your spaces.
I do. And then again, I like I love, and there, you know, every rug is completely a different different weave, a different texture. I love the fact that in this case, it's the color, and then again, it's the texture against the terrazzo. But I hardly can't design a house without some sort of form of an interesting carpet. And I really do like hard surface floors with area rugs. That's probably, I think, for cleanability, for change of decor, for longevity. I think that these are actually old terrazzo floors in the house. These are not something I put down. And you can kind of see how that, but yet these are modern Moroccan rugs without a pattern and just more of the brushing of the kind of like, lack of a better word, dyed kind of variation in hue.
Right. Well, I love the color. I love the use of color against the neutral backdrop. And also there is well, this is a beautiful view too, the same room. And then we also have the guest bedroom, which makes an even bigger impact, I think, because of this amazing sheepskin bed. And you said to me that you wanted it to be sort of an Austin Powers room, a California hippie vibe. And I think you hit the nail on the head. And I bet you that I'm guessing that your guests just have the most fun staying in this room.
Well, I would like to tell you that the guests would have the most, but during COVID, we have had no guests. And this has been done, this whole house has been put together from March to basically the present time. And we're pretty much finished with it. So I'm hoping the future guests will be. One of the things I want to point out is that one thing I've learned about guests is that not all guests are as agile as others. And so the bed is, we've had people, you've seen little beds with little spiky legs on it and someone catches their toe and does that sort of thing with it. Mm-hmm. I've kind of learned that I see that a lot with people that stay. So I've tried to now do kind of soft surfaces everywhere. So if someone gets up in the middle of the night and bumps into a bed, they don't get hurt. Thus, this is an extreme version of that, but it looks like it will be very comfortable for future guests.
I think it will be. We can't wait till the day that we can do that more. I know that you're traveling a lot back and forth, but I'm sure you welcome the day where you can have more guests. So, then I need to tell everyone about one of the reasons that you're flying back and forth from Atlanta to Palm Springs a lot is because you just purchased a new home in Atlanta about a month ago, right?
That's correct.
And you have already, because I don't know how you do it, Bill, but you've already overhauled.
It's overhauled and we're moving in tomorrow.
You're moving in tomorrow? Oh my gosh.
Tomorrow's the day and they're working on it today. Well, this is the Atlanta home. My home is Atlanta. My work is in Atlanta. Most of the time I spend in Atlanta. And it's funny because everyone gets the idea because of Facebook that you're always in California. I think because you're having so much fun, you're always photographing in California and you're working in Atlanta and you're really not thinking about your next selfie. You're really thinking about what you really have to get done at the office. So this house represents kind of an extension of my work here. We were renting at Ponce City before this, Ponce City Market, and that was a really experience that I loved living in the warehouse and kind of an ant bed of a society, and I love the adaptive reuse of Ponce City and everything. Mm-hmm. So that got me thinking about, I've never really lived in an old house. When you start thinking of the other houses that you've seen, the oldest house I've ever lived in was 1936. Well, when this came on the market, I loved it. And it took a little while to sell. And so it kind of came down to a reasonable price. And then I said, you know what? I told Joe, I said, he loved it too. I said, let's try something different. And this is 1886. So ask me in a year how will we feel about it. But I think I'm going to love the idea of experiencing something I've never done before.
I think so too. And I also love something you said to me about how, you and Joe are buying a Victorian house and you are going to modernize it in a lot of ways, or you already have on the interior. You mentioned you painted everything Benjamin Moore super white. You've added this sort of flat burnt black trim. You've sort of brought the original heart pine floors to their original glory, but without a stain. And then you're also bringing in, this sort of more modern furnishings, which I can only imagine how amazing it looks. I haven't seen the interior. But you mentioned to me that if you had other clients who maybe wanted you know, to go more antique, more traditional direction. You could do that with a Victorian. You're very diverse in how you approach the projects, depending on who the client is, right?
Well, absolutely. And this house, when we purchased it, had been really taken to kind of an extreme Victorian heavy, sort of dusty sort of a look. But I just noticed the way a lot of people want to live today. They want to live a little bit more open. They want privacy a little bit, but they want to do it. And a lot of these houses were smaller rooms and they were chopped up. And they're hard sometimes for people to adapt a family into them. So I've tried to kind of take that and be very respectful of the architecture. I think if you kind of went through the house, you wouldn't really think anything had changed. But that's what I want you to think. And the other thing is, I also want to tell people, you know, you can live a lot of different ways in a house like this. A lot of people look to me and go, oh, I hate Victorian furniture. I can't possibly see that. Well, you don't have to have Victorian furniture in here. And I'm using modern furniture that has cues to Victorian furniture, like tufting, you know, old rugs that are like worn out but over dyed, you know, so it may be white inside, but there's going to be spots of color, but it's not going to be a deep, dark, smoky interior. It's
Right.
going to be one that's a little bit brighter and airier, but living with something that has a wonderful shell of the past, but that you continually, to me, architecture and especially interiors are living, breathing things, just like we are. They are
Right.
meant to change. They're meant to adapt to your family. They're meant to adapt to your lifestyle. The kids are gone, you change things. You know, a new kid is born, you change things. You know, someone moves into your house, a relative, you know, you change things. You get married, you change. So I think that an interior really should reflect the individual. And that's why I think we are all living our lives in these structures, and that is our experience that we're doing. That's what we're doing.
Great, great. Yeah, and I also noticed that you said this. You said, I believe in the house adapting to us rather than us adapting to the house. So I thought that was really beautiful and feels very, it feels very current, like something we can work with these historic properties. So we do have some questions from our audience members. If I would love to sort of pose some of those questions to you, Bill, if you're up for it.
Certainly.
Let's see. Oh, here's a really fun question. Did you move around as a kid? And did you have the ability to let go of past houses and keep looking ahead at new places?
Absolutely not. In fact, not only did I not move around as a kid, I only remember one house. And my parents built that house when I was when I was like 3 or 4 years old, and my parents died in that house. And so that house saw our whole life, you know, from college to high school to my sister, to kids, to, you know, everything in the world. But no, and but to give you an idea about can I get rid of things, I guess maybe to me, and I know this thing is called an experience, but you know, I want to experience things. It's no different than going, like we talked about, going to Disneyland. The idea that you go to Frontierland, Adventureland, and go to Tomorrowland, and then you go to Main Street USA. You do it all. You enjoy it. There's some things you like more than others. Absolutely. And the idea of living differently in different places, different locations, even flying and visiting them, is that you pick up on other cultures. You pick up on other ideas from people. And me being a designer and be kind of multidisciplined with the architecture and the landscape, I love all periods. So people said, a lot of my friends said, you're a modernist. How can you be buying a Victorian house? Well, I said, just wait. This is the way I'm going to be a modernist that lives in a Victorian house. And I'm not going to take this house with me. I look forward to the days and time that we get to spend with family and friends here. And it's a new chapter. And the other ones were great chapters, but I'm ready for a new novel.
Right, right. And I love that about you, how you're always changing and always moving forward.
And you know, and clients come to us for a lot of those reasons. And I have this wonderful set of clients that are up there in years, and late 80s, early 90s. And they just called us about, we want to change the colors in our house. Well, you know, we're really changing the colors in the house. And I love the fact that her husband said, you know, I change all the paintings all around, you know, to look at them differently. And I think if anything keeps us young at heart, I think change does it. We have to adapt to it. And, you know, it's so easy to live with the same thing that you've always lived with. And, you know, just even a coat of paint can make a whole new outlook on life. And it can make you think that you freshened up your place by just doing something simple like that. Or it could be like moving things around and not necessarily keeping them static. It just keeps us on our toes.
Oh, I love it. And we have a lot of questions coming in actually, so I'm going to try to get to all of them or get to as many as possible. Here's another great question. You have an unbelievable knowledge of history, Bill. I was struck by your story of living in the Beverly Hills Hotel to better understand it when you were designing the Pink House. Do you believe research is an important part of your craft and your creativity?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, curiosity. It's called curiosity. It's like, who gets on the internet and starts searching out things and finding things? I mean, and it's so much more available to us now. I remember back in the day when I was in school, you know, 1978 in college, you know, we had to go to the library to look for things. I mean, you rode your bike to the library, checked it in, you had to go look at the books. I mean, just to find one or two things. Nowadays, you want to say modern Victorian house, ding, you'll see how other people have done the same thing that you're thinking about. And this is something else that's really interesting about research. It connects you to other people. I can't tell you how many people on Instagram and Facebook that I've had conversations with that said, oh my God, you like Victorian houses? So, we live in one. And so you kind of almost become this virtual relationship just because of design. And I think the other thing that people have to realize about design, you move into a neighborhood, you don't know anyone. You do a bang up job, do something interesting in a house, people want to know who you are. You get to meet them. It's almost like a ticket to get together with people. People love expression. And I think people like colorful things. So I think in sharing, and I know I'm going off on a little bit, but it all comes back from research. And your research can be just as simple as the keyboard on the computer.
Right. Well, we have all these amazing tools now. And that's one reason why it's even more fascinating to me that you started in the late 70s without those same kind of resources. And you've created this incredible body of work that's like from your own mind exclusively. And well, not exclusively, but I think that artistry, you know, is able to come from within without so much, you know, outside noise. It's great. So let's see, we got another question. Can you tell us a little bit about the current work you're doing for clients? Maybe mention one or two client projects that you're really excited about at the moment.
Yes, we're very fortunate in the age of COVID. We're very busy. I think a lot of people have probably stayed at home and looked around and said, we got to do something about this. But yes, we're doing a very interesting project on top of the St. Regis. It's a redo of a very elaborate condominium, and it's for a wonderful entrepreneur and his family. And it's going to be slightly avant-garde inside, and we're going to kind of keep the shell that was created by the former owners. And that's another thing I wanted to kind of touch on is about, I don't believe in just destroying everything and starting from scratch. I think that I love to show a little bit of the history of what's happened to a structure,
Yeah.
even though it's not that old. And I think there's so many ways. I think so many people just want to go in and just erase everything that's been done. And I think that you have to look around and kind of pick your battles, especially, you know, these days with things as expensive as they are. I think you really do have to do that. But this is a really exciting job. It's going to take about a year long to do it. And the approach is kind of based upon a lot of things that you've seen. We're going to take something that's very ornate and try to fit a contemporary interior in it. And we're going to do some changes that reflect what the family wishes. And this will be a whole new place for themselves, even though it's obviously a former residence from someone else. We've also just finished a wonderful job on Sea Island, and that is my partner Bill has done. And I think one of the great things about having a partnership at the office is that Bill and I are so completely different. I'm the yin to his yang, or the yang to his yin, and but we love bouncing our ideas off each other. I would like to say that he's more practical than me, but sometimes in the end, I think I'm pretty practical. And I think that I love the marriage of whether it's two partners at work and understand things, whether it's two partners in life, or whether it's your friends. I think we all are inspired by people. And so as far as jobs that we are, other jobs that we are working on, we're working on, it seems to be several renovations and doing some work down in condominiums down in Florida for people that have migrated from Atlanta. And ironically, they want to take a lot of their Atlanta furnishings down there. So that's a challenge, but we're working through that. So we're having a quite a busy season.
You don't slow down, Bill, that's for sure.
Well, there are times that I am slower than you think. But I hope age doesn't catch up with me, but I think it's bound to happen. But I think you have to take advantage of the moment in life.
Oh my gosh.
You know, we all don't know what's around the corner. And I think this year has been a great thing that, you know, we've all had to adjust. And I think we can complain, we can talk, we can do anything we want to, but there's always something that positive that will come out of even something negative.
Yes, and I have a note, it's not a question, but I think this is very important to mention. The Beverly Hills Hotel was designed by a noted Black architect, I think Paul Williams, right?
Yes, that is correct.
He also designed the Palm Springs house for Lucy and Desi. So
That is correct. He did several things. Paul Williams was an incredible architect and a very sophisticated soul.
And we can have another conversation offline about how amazing he was. I loved his upside down drawings. I would love to talk about that. So there were a couple statements, sort of quotes from you that I wanted to leave the audience with before I wrap up. And I love how you said, homes are an experience that opens up the doors to the future. You're ready for the next experience, and where you live might not be forever, but what's in the future is really great. As humans, we want to look toward a positive future. And I really loved that because I think everyone kind of needs to hear that right now, but it's also very true. And I love the idea of houses being sort of the vehicle for that, for everyone sort of having a brighter future and embracing sort of the next phase where they become a better version of themselves, which I think is something you've done very actively, as we've seen in your portfolio. And another thing you said to me was, the teacher in me says I would like to inspire younger people to realize that there are no upper limits. And I wondered if that's something, if you wanted to leave the audience with a lasting impression, would it be that, or would it be something else you'd like to conclude with?
You know, they're so hard to leave an audience. It really is. I mean, I think if anything else, as if I could say something that I would like more than anything to say, is that I want to make people comfortable. I would love to make people comfortable with themselves, with their interior. And when I say comfort, there's two types of comfort. There's a visual comfort and there's a spiritual comfort. Visual comfort and is something that, you know, we look at and, you know, we feel good about it. You look at a room and it pleases your eye. And there's a physical comfort that is the sofa comfortable and all that. So I think they're equally important, the physical and the visual. And then there's spiritual comfort that makes you think that, you know, you're basically, like you said, the house is something that just kind of hugs you, just puts your arms around you. You go to bed at night, you feel safe there. It's where you eat, you drink, you entertain, you talk on the phone, you're on the computer. It really, it's the heart of us. So I think that we as designers I love satisfying my clients. I love to see happy faces. I love to see people, you know, enjoying what has been created. And you know, it is a collaboration between us all. So the teacher in me really wants to tell other people that, and I would love to teach. It's one thing I never really got to do. I really do like people just to express themselves. And I think so many times that we get suppressed and try to follow like a certain trend or a certain idea. And, you know, basically everything that you've seen, even in this work, they are all trends, underlying trends that you'll see. And I think that you can't get away from that. But I think what's important is a sense of place more than anything else.
Sense of place. I think we've definitely gotten that today, looking back through your work, which is fantastic. Thank you so much. I want to say it's been such a pleasure to talk with you today. I've not ever had the opportunity to talk in such depth with you, and it's been a real treat. And I really think that all the audience members probably have enjoyed that as well. And I want to thank you and thank the team at ADAC again for putting together such a fantastic event. I want to thank our sponsor, Designer Carpets, for making this talk possible. And I think we've learned a lot about creating experiences in design from Bill. And so I just want to thank everyone for their great questions. And again, I'm Kate Abney. I'm the Homes Editor of Luxe Interiors and Designs Southeast Edition. And I hope you enjoyed today's talk, and you'll check out our magazine and enjoy the September-October current issue. It's one of my favorites. Thank you again, and have a great weekend, everyone.
Thank you.